A happy family of 3 moved the remaining belongings to a new house. The main few things were delivered and set up by movers in the morning, and the owners had only to move into a new home and equip their own cozy nest. Happiness knew no bounds. In the harsh economic times of the mid-s, finding cheap housing in Siberia was an extremely problematic task. But luck smiled at them, and when the father of the family was offered a house for mere pennies, he immediately, without hesitation, agreed. Of course, alarming thoughts visited him and his wife, but no matter what, they missed the chance. They drove all doubts away. After all, such luck is issued once in a lifetime, and it needs to be used. During their entry, the neighbors somehow strangely and sadly watched them. But at the same time, not a single person came up. They only greeted ruefully. Probably they were just jealous of their happiness, the couple decided. After placing the unpacked things in the corners, the family went into the kitchen, saturated with a sharp and sour aroma, and immediately the mother noticed one interesting detail. In the center of the white table stood a lone uncorked bottle of vinegar essence. The woman gasped and immediately hid it in a wall cabinet, away from the eyes of little Valley. All day they cleaned up and arranged things, and in the late afternoon, my mother figured out a modest dinner. First meal together in their private nest. Tonight they were destined to sleep on mattresses laid on the floor. The beds will be assembled tomorrow. On the first day, with the sunset, oddities began. First one hit. Then the second. Then a series of knocks rumbled through the room in a frightening wave. The sound was coming from the attic. Father, armed with a heavy poker, decided to check the room and establish the cause of the terrible sound. But like in classic horror movies, there was no one in the attic. The blows subsided, and the man returned to his family. But not even half an hour passed before a new phenomenon terrified them. Measured heavy steps were heard from the ceiling, and they were present only in the room where the frightened family was. As if someone in the attic followed them from room to room. It would be superfluous to say that when he went up there, his father did not see anyone. Not the slightest sign of someone else's presence. And then the fear was treacherously replaced by an all-consuming animal horror. Someone from the attic not only walked heavily and measuredly, stomping loudly, but also began to howl. Howl like a dying calf. The mother pinched the ears of the little Valia, who did not understand anything, and the father wandered from side to side with a heavy poker in his hand, not knowing how to influence the situation. This is how their first night in the new house passed. And as soon as the first rays of the sun illuminated the blue sky, the father hastily left somewhere. And soon he returned with a strange bearded man dressed in a long black robe. The stranger recited strange and incomprehensible verses in a bass voice, fumigating everything with a sugary-smelling smoke. His parents called him father. Knocked out of the rut by strange and mystical events, the family completely forgot about the installation of beds, and for the second night in a row mattresses were waiting for them to be pulled into the sweet embrace of Morpheus. But the dream was not sweet. Nothing has changed. Something from the attic still stomped loudly and howled terribly. And the uncorked bottle of vinegar essence inexplicably ended up again on the white wood of the kitchen table. This went on day after day, or rather night after night. Valia's father, never particularly drunk, began to take a drink. The parents were getting nervous. In the once friendly family, not a day passed without a scandal. They would have moved out of the accursed house long ago, only the family bought it with their last money. And they had nowhere to go. Valia saw how her always happy and smiling parents changed into people who seemed to be strangers to each other. And that made her feel sad and somehow uncomfortable. Neither the clatter nor the howl frightened her. The children's brain did not perceive all the horror that happened in their house with the onset of night. She just felt a little sad when something roared from the attic and sour notes of vinegar came from the kitchen. And soon little Valia began to sleep with her mother on the same mattress. And almost constantly drunk father on the other. Unassembled beds and gathering dust in the back room. The man, however, did not know how to protect his family from the looming horror and therefore ran away from problems towards the green serpent. And on one of those days, the unthinkable happened. Early in the morning, when the family was still sleeping, my mother went into the kitchen and drank that same bottle of essence in one gulp. From the cries of pain, the drunken father woke up. Whispering, "What have you done?" he hurried to call an ambulance. Fortunately, the neighbors had a telephone. Paramedics arrived quickly and took my mother away. But all attempts to save the woman were in vain. She died. After the funeral, my father began to drink more than ever. He then fell into a rage at this creature, with whom nothing could be done, and then wept for a long time and quietly remembering his always smiling wife. Always cheerful until they moved into this damned house that smelled of vinegar. And 2 weeks later, nightmares began to occur not only at night, but also during the day. And the attic was not the only location of the poltergeist. There were 2 ghosts or entities. In broad daylight, when the sad Valia was playing on the floor with a doll, her father suddenly began to shout some nonsense she did not understand. He asked them to leave and leave. And the shivering crockery in the kitchen cupboards answered in unison to my father's cries. And stink. The unbearable sour stench of vinegar spread like a heavy amber through the rooms. And things got even worse. During the day, objects moved, dishes rattled, and the worst thing was little Valia distinctly heard her mother crying sadly in the kitchen. And only the night came into its possession. In the attic someone again stomped and howled like a calf in an exhausted way. On one of those days, Valia went to the kitchen to drink water and saw a small open bottle on the table. The girl tried to get it, but the small hand barely touched her fingers, shaking the glass object. Then the clever Valia, dragging a stool, stood on it and took a bottle of clear liquid. The girl sniffed at first, but the liquid did not smell of anything. And deciding that it was water Valia decided to drink. She reached her lips to the vial of vinegar essence. At the very last moment, a drunken father ran in and knocked the poison out of little hands. The bottle flew off into a corner and, without breaking, spilled the contents. And then, like an explosion, the room reeked strongly of vinegar. The father began to cry and with force pressed to his chest the most beloved person in the world. Blaming himself for the near tragedy, he vowed never to drink again. Soon the man gave up alcohol, but this did not save them from nightmares. The nightmares only got worse. Objects moved more often, dishes fell off the shelves and broke, and mother's crying was now heard not only in the kitchen, but also from any room where father and Valia were not at that moment. And soon the girl began to notice the silhouette of the microtary in a funeral dress. Not understanding what was happening, the child ran after his mother, but she disappeared into the room where she went. By that time, something from the attic had ceased to show itself as if tired, or transferred the main role in a nightmarish game to the spirit of the mother who killed herself. The father also saw his wife, but unlike his daughter, he did not run after his dead wife, but rather screamed in horror, and grabbing Valia pressed him tightly to him. And in the evenings, during a nightmarish climax to the sounds of shaking dishes and howling martyrdom, he shouted to the whole house, "Get away from us. You died. You are no more. No, you've been buried. Get away from us." At such moments, little Valia covered her ears with her palms, but not out of fear. She just didn't like noise. Yes, she was not used to the always brave and cheerful dad screaming so frightened. But the father's tantrums led to nothing, and the mother's restless spirit continued to frighten them. On one of the rare calm days, Valia was left at home alone. Father went for bread. She played in a large and bright room, which Dad and Mom called the hall. And on the wall with light wallpaper hung a portrait of a parent with a black mourning ribbon. The girl, as if sensing someone else's gaze, raised her eyes to her mother's photo. From the black and white shot, a beautiful brunette smiled sweetly. Valia again lowered her eyes to the floor and continued to play. And then her gaze fell on her bare feet and the hem of her funeral gown. She looked up sharply and saw her dead mother. Pale and with the gleam of once cheerful brown eyes gone out, she whispered something inaudibly with bloody lips. And again, the sour amber of the vinegar spirit was carried around the house. The girl was not scared, but rather delighted. She had not seen her mother for a long time, and thought that she no longer loved her. Valia jumped up and hugged the deceased by the legs. Mom's dress smelled strange, like earth and a cellar. The deceased leaned over to the baby and whispered something in her ear with bloodied lips. The girl nodded happily. The woman took Valia by the hand, and they slowly went to the kitchen, where an uncorked vial of vinegar was waiting for them. And when there was no more than a meter left before the turn, the father called out to the baby. Immediately, the ghost of his wife disappeared instantly. Valia kept her hand in the air, squeezing the air, and when asked by her father what she was doing here, the girl answered with a smile, "Dad, Mom is here. She calls me with her. Live with her. And then we'll come for you." Horror like an electric current ran through the man's body, leaving goosebumps behind. He held his daughter close to him and wept softly. He knew what to do to keep Valia alive. In the evening, my father again went to the store and soon returned with a bottle of vodka. All evening, he hugged his daughter and said how much he loves her. And as soon as the girl went to bed, he went to the kitchen. Through a dream, Valia heard Dad talking to someone. He offered himself instead of his daughter. Well, in the morning it became clear that the father's proposal was accepted. The man was found hanged in the kitchen, and on the table, in addition to an empty bottle of vodka and pickles, there was an open vial of vinegar essence. Someone kept him company. On the same day, an unfamiliar woman came to Valia and said with a smile that she was her aunt and now they would live together. The girl did not understand why she should live with her and not with her parents. After all, Mom is at home. She's just playing hide and seek. Walks from room to room. Or like a sorceress, come out of your portrait with a black ribbon. And Dad doesn't scream anymore. He just swings quietly on a string in the kitchen. At these words, the aunt and her husband looked at each other strangely and said something inaudibly to each other. Well, after the first night in the accursed house, they in horror collected some of the things and left it, of course, without forgetting about little Valia. But on this evil fate did not leave the girl. Already living with her aunt and uncle, she began to see her mother. The deceased came out of the wall and said something sadly. Far from the accursed house, the baby did not understand the words of the parent, and the rooms no longer smelled sore and harsh. But soon the girl began to talk and play with someone. She could laugh for no reason for hours, while shedding tears. I didn't interact with the other kids. And at the same time, when asked by adults whether she remembers her parents, she confidently answered, "Dad is at home. He is in the kitchen. It hangs and swings on a rope. Mom is also at home, but she plays hide and seek." A child psychologist worked with Valia for a long time, and then she was sent to a hospital. Paramedics painstakingly and for a long time fought for the sanity of the little girl. And they succeeded. Valia went to her first grade like all children, but only lived in an orphanage. Not because her own aunt refused her. Vice versa. Relatives did not leave Valia. Throughout her childhood and adolescence, they helped her in any way they could. It's just scary to have a niece at home to whom a long-dead mother comes to visit. Time passed and a stately brunette Valentina grew out of little Valia. Smart and confident woman. Strong in spirit and helping anyone who suffers. But the old wounds just like that do not heal, and one day, she decided to go to her old house anyway. The house that took her parents away from her. Moreover, according to the aunt, the house did not stop at the murder of their family. While Valentina was at school, he was rented out to a grandmother and her grandson. After some time, 2 bodies were found in the house. The boy drank vinegar, and the woman hanged herself. The accursed house met the old mistress, looking at her with windows that had not been washed for a long time. Valentina entered it and immediately felt the stale air grow heavier. Pictures of the past flashed through her head, and her heart quickened the beat. She slowly walked around the gloomy rooms, leaving the kitchen, the most terrible for her, for last. She was afraid to see someone familiar and dear, but not alive for a long time. And when Valentina entered it, after a few seconds she flew out into the street like a bullet. No, she did not see her father or mother. She was frightened by the invitingly open half-empty bottle of vinegar. Soon, by order of the new mistress of the house, Valentina, the house was locked up, and the entrance was boarded up with boards. Well, the workers could swear that when they drove nails into the boards, they heard a terrible howl from the attic through the blows. Howling like a dying cough.